we could wait for a few more people because we're quite hard to find, but I think we should just start. So my name's Cassie and I'm here with my Joseph Roundtree Foundation hat on, and I'm really glad to be doing this panel. I'm really glad to be doing the panel here because I wanted to kind of bring the conversation around how you design for transition. So as we're thinking about regenerative places, levelling up the social fabric, all of these things that we're all kind of working towards in terms of more equitable features in place and in community. Some of the work Joseph Roundtree is doing now is thinking about how do you really bring long-term intention to that, and recognising that that requires working at multiple levels over time, and that's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm really glad to have with me Kat Drew, who is the Chief Design Officer at the Design Council. I'm not going to go through everyone's past careers. You have their bios and they're very illustrious. I've got Toby Lloyd, who's here from the Create Streets Foundation and previously chaired the No Place Left Behind Commission. I've got Angie Wright, who's the Chief Exec from Be Inspired and is an expert in community-led regeneration. And I've got Reid from Kiondo, who's the founder of Kiondo. And I don't even know how to describe what you call
we have design community.
Yeah.
So Kiondo is a design company, non-profit, and essentially we help design communities by partnering with social entrepreneurs and developing their business proposals, their projects, their initiatives, and helping partner them with the sector, support wider scale, I guess, regeneration.
Thanks, Andre. So we're going to have time for some questions at the end, and I also we have this one visual that I wanted to share, but it's going to get in the way of the nice filming, but we're going to put it up towards the end. He's put it up. It's gone again. He's like, he's teased us with it. Maybe put it up for 1 minute. And I guess I just wanted to share this. This is being adapted, but it's called the socio-technical transitions, and that sounds very theoretical, but actually I think this one visual brings to life kind of some of what I hope we'll cover, which is that you need to work at that landscape level with culture, with myth, with that kind of macro scale. You need to work with the regime, the kind of hidden wiring, the policy, the regulation. You need to work at the community level, and you also need to work in what we think of as the soil, the healing, the kind of imagination and things like that. So we're going to touch on all of those things with these speakers. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Kat, and she's going to share a bit about the work they're doing at the Design Council.
Thanks, Cassie. Can everyone hear me? Is that on? I don't have a button, so I'll just speak loudly. So I'm Kat, and I'm the Chief Design Officer at the Design Council, and we are the National Strategic Advisor for Design and have been around for about 75 years. And I thought I'd start off by saying a little bit about what design is, and then a role for design in transitions, and mention a little bit about sort of the work that we're doing. So first of all, design for us is about the shaping of ideas about how to live better. And it works at many different kind of levels and paces, and it's both on one hand the kind of almost scientific, rational problem-solving process, making things inclusive and sustainable, but also it's a way of opening up imagination and making it tangible, what's in people's heads tangible, so that other people can understand what might be possible. And it covers everything from the design of products and services to the design of places and urban and natural infrastructures, and also the systems that underpin how we live our lives. So as I said, it can work with the macro and the micro. The micro, it might be the digital interface that makes it really easy to get a COVID test, or to work with your community to share food waste. Or at the macro level, it might be about how urban landscapes connect parks to schools and to places to work, and also as Cassie was saying, to shape some of the bigger narratives about how we live. Do we live in a consumerist throwaway culture or a circular and regenerative one? And as the UK's National Strategic Advisor for Design, we support the 1.97 million people who work in the design economy, which is a huge amount, so 1 in 20 working age people, but also huge amounts more people who aren't professional designers but are working in businesses, communities, and in the public sector who use design skills in their work. So the role in design for transitions is really, really important. It kind of fits in, we've got a Design Council with a Design for Planet mission, which is all about kind of designing a regenerative world for all. When we were set up, design was very much about kind of producing things that people could buy as part of rebuilding the post-war economy, and some of that has got us into the mess we're in now. And so our new mission is trying to kind of right some of that. And I think just to set out how I think design in transitions is really important is design can be great at that immediate problem solving, and it really, really is. It's what we talk about all the time, it's how we kind of show its value to businesses. It's about kind of identifying a problem, working with data, spatial mapping and users to reframe it, developing lots of creative ideas and prototyping and testing. But I think design for transitions can also work at a deeper level to really pave the way to a kind of regenerative society. And last year, working with Cassie and others, we published 2 reports of Design Council setting out a little bit of a different framework for how design might do that. We've got the systemic design framework, which is our kind of best practice, and system shifting design, which is a kind of the next practice document. And so how design can do that? So 3 things. First of all, designing at the level of the deep code. So the policy, the regulations, the rules about kind of what is being physically designed, whether that's a building or a service, and that determine how we, how we interact with the world and making it easier for other designs to come. So that might be building in kind of biodiversity net gains or kind of natural value into how we design our places. It might be designing out fire regulations that mean you can't actually build houses out of timber and so on. The other thing is around design showing what alternatives can do. So in its most creative, this is about not necessarily finding a solution, but proposing what could be, and using this to unlock other people's imagination. So at the moment, there's Nelly Ben Haroun, who's a French designer. She is touring the UK with her Tour de Moon, which is a part of the Festival 2022, and really helping communities imagine very, very different alternatives. And then finally, design is brilliant at bringing lots of different types of people and initiatives together across the ecosystem that Cassie showed. So working with communities and businesses and policymakers, all working on various different initiatives, but design can stitch that all together into a bigger narrative. And it's also really great at providing the kind of the tools and the mindsets that allow people to take their ideas and turn them into action. So one of the things that we're doing at Design Council is a programme called Design Differently, where we're working with communities across the UK, across the 4 nations, where we've seen that communities are using design. And actually what they have said to us that they really need is us to bring them together so they can learn together, connect them up with professional designers who do have some specific skills, connect them up with councils who have got some of the kind of the power to unlock what they want to do around climate change, and bring that all together. So that's what we're going over the next year and a half. I've got some other examples, but I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you, Kat. I think a lot of what you said really resonates with me, because my background, having come from architecture and gone into the arts profession, being an artist, being an entrepreneur, I've actually developed this business from a very, I feel, different perspective. I've worked very much on the ground with a lot of different creatives, and I've supported their ventures as they build more socially active, like socially vested enterprises. So I'll give you a little bit more information about Kiondo and what we actually do. We started off as a co-design practice, so as I said, it started in architecture, and we started off designing spaces based on user accessibility needs, so working with people with dyslexia, or visual impairment, or physical impairment, and creating spaces. And what we found is when we create spaces with those people in those environments, there was a lack of knowledge around actually understanding how we, in those spaces, there's a lack of knowledge in the public domain in terms of what sustainability looks like on a day-to-day level of living in those spaces, creating and accessing them. So we began working on essentially manufacturing around health and well-being, and for the last 3 years, and so it's a bit nerve-wracking. I'm doing fine, yeah? Okay. Let's start here. So Kiondo's a design company. We work as a sector-based partner, supporting socially vested organisations in Warsaw and the surrounding West Midlands. We respond to social, cultural and environmental challenges. So we work with different entrepreneurs that are developing product-based solutions and want to build really deep communities around those products, those solutions. That could be software, it could be applications, it could be experiences. But essentially, our point of view is that we build rituals, because that's where communities actually start their relationships from. These are the things which actually build our identities, our purpose, and our sense of belonging. And so, I guess in the last few years, we've been working very much around people and place. The work I've been doing essentially looks at how a place like Warsaw, which has been left behind, very much so by, sorry, why am I doing this now? Just a minute. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I'm so nervous. Do you mind if I come back? Come back to me. Yeah, can you come back to me just a minute? Yeah, sorry.
It's very important what it's
I completely started
When you got to Warsaw, I mean, it's really good, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just, I'm passionate about it, but I can't even talk about it. I think I've lived in Warsaw for the last 3-5 years, and I've watched that place slowly deteriorate. I myself, an architectural practitioner, but an artist working with so many creatives, see that potential and see people's not a lack of willingness, but a lack of accessibility to being able to shape those places. And so my work is very much shaped around how do we enable people to feel like they can actually shape the places they live in. So we started with asking people, when you look inside your home, how do you shape your home? You choose, you make these decisions, and these decisions are based on a sense of creating purpose and identity in that space. But we don't look outside. So we start looking outside and we start taking people on tours around their own neighborhood and getting them to interact with the archaeology of those spaces, the architecture, the urban design, and really start to understand who is shaping these places. So we build experiences, we build programs, we build events that help educate those people and kind of integrate them into the wider community of the place shaping that's happening. So that could be with the local council, it could be with the art practitioners, it could be with the local businesses. And when we start those conversations, something happens. I facilitate those sessions with co-design principles, and we bring people together and we start to imagine what is possible. To support that work, we invested in a creative space in the middle of Warsaw Town Centre. There are no creative facilities in that space, in that facility, and this isn't uncommon to a lot of areas in the UK. But the challenges that people have, what we've realised from after going through the pandemic, is that it's not necessarily space-based. There's a lot more issues that play a part in why people aren't able to really see themselves as staying in an area, feeling healthy, feeling well, feeling like they can actually shape that area to the experience they want. And so our work very much has now centered around the idea of focusing on the individuals that have the creative potential and building up their potential by designing their solutions with them, designing their communities with them, and through the relationships that we've built with the local authority, with the other arts, with the art practitioners, with the investment groups, we build projects that we can start to see actual change in specific neighbourhoods within within their geographical region. So an example of one of these projects, a really simple one, is a photography business that for anyone else would just think this is a normal photography business, but they work in PR and journalism. Now we have a huge culture of social media, and we've got huge amounts of young people that are using social media to create all kinds of ideas and put out all kinds of images out there, but they're not able to make a sustainable income. Even though we're using a lot of, they're trying to become viral, but they're not able to make a sustainable income and like able to tell the stories of their area and actually how they would like to see that differently. So we're working with we're working with an organisation there to develop a workshop program to develop these kids into being more aware of how they can use the technology that they have without having to purchase anything else to be more sustainable within their areas, tell the stories of that local neighbourhood, develop further. We're working with building construction engineers that are looking to support black women into construction from the age of 14. We've noticed a huge gap in people entering the construction field, and they also notice that there is a lack of understanding around sustainability within those sectors, being beyond just a statutory requirement. And so what they really want to do is integrate and look at design and use design thinking and use all these principles to open up that space so that we can have more people in that sector creating solutions that we haven't seen before, ideas that we haven't seen before, and also being able to, as we say, have a sustainable sense of living, because we speak a lot about sustainability, but for a lot of people it's inaccessible, it's not affordable, so we have to find ways to create businesses, social enterprises, and families that can actually live this lifestyle by working with them, and we do it by working with them closely. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on some of what you said.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andre. Over to you, Angie.
Hi everybody. Got all passionate when we started talking about the place.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you did, because that's where I'm coming from. So I'm not coming from a design perspective at all. Cassie kindly said an expert in community regeneration, thank you for that, but I wouldn't class myself as that either. However, I have been working in regeneration for 20 plus years, but specifically for the last 18 years in a place called Braunston in Leicester. How many people here know of Leicester? Wow, that's great. Because we won the Premiership in 2016. We've now given to the third bones, which has been a great boon for the city, I have to say. Not for Braunston, which is where I'm based, which I don't see a penny of that. Braunston, anybody heard of Braunston in Leicester? Okay, I've got people left and right, so that's good. But Braunston was a place that was selected as the New Deal for Communities area, and I'm going to say how many remember that programme, New Deal for Communities. John Prescott's baby at the time. I think it's what Tony Blair gave him to do to keep him occupied, so it didn't bother him too much really. So John Prescott led the new Labour wave of regeneration with New Deal for Communities. So we're one of the 39, as it were, poorest, worst states in the country. As we were, we gladly took that mantle at the time because it meant we could have £49.5 million. And we were competing for it to be the worst. So that's where we were. However, listening to some of the comments this morning around sort of the role of local authority, the role of government, regeneration funds, where money comes from, who makes the decisions, who has the power, people of Braunston did not want the local authority at all to be involved in their regeneration programme. They'd let them down for decades, so why would they want to trust those very same people with all that money? It was their money. So they chose a housing association, so there was an interesting model. I think it was one of a handful in the country that didn't actually go with a local authority leadership model for accountability, so that made it a little bit more unique. So it was very, very much resident-led and facilitated by a local housing association, which at the time was local, it was just a Leicester-based one. It's now sort of one of these multi-housing associations now. So that's where my organisation formulated in 1999 in actual fact, and it started as a task force. Remember in those days everything was a task force, wasn't it? So we had our local Braunston task force, which became a community association, which was also the main term that was used in those days. Subsequently, after the 10-year regeneration, and I could talk for weeks about that, and the struggles and everything that came with it, we made £49 million, stretched to £72 million, because when you've got money, you get more money. That seems to be the way it is in regeneration. And by the end of 2010, when big government money finished at that time, we became a legacy organisation by are turning into a community business, and this is really important because we've actually created a lot of assets, much of which we owned, and we've subsequently taken ownership of more locally, and that's housing, managed workspace, offices. We even own and run a very large health centre, which we went back to the NHS, which I love the notion of that. So we've become quite a large landlord in many respects in the local area, and we operate over 70% of our own earned income. So we're a charity with a training company that has over 70% of its income earned. And we use that money to continue what we believe is a neighbourhood renewal process in our area, despite the wider factors that affect everything else that goes on around us and things that get built and we don't necessarily get even consulted about and those sorts of things. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Angie. We definitely want to hear a bit from you in a while about what you've learned about this like long-term change, like how long it really takes and how deep you have to go. Toby, you're going to talk a bit more about the hidden wiring of this idea of transitions.
Thank you. I chaired something for Create Streets called the No Place Left Behind Commission, which published its final report in autumn last year. It had 55 policy recommendations ranging across a whole range of different areas that I'm not going to go through them all, you'll be relieved to hear. I'll just focus on kind of 3 specific bits of that very broad agenda. Think about regeneration, restitching, social fabric it really does cover absolutely everything from the high street to business to employment training, you can talk about any aspect of this. But the ones I thought would be most relevant to this conversation are, firstly, it's about kind of the design of the urban realm itself, the actual physical fabric of the places that we live in, which is astonishingly undervalued in this country. We tend to really underplay the importance of streets, corners, the little bits of the public space that we actually is where we tend to interact with our neighbours. That's actually where community life kind of happens most, and it's often very, very ignored, or even worse, actively undermined. We actually have a whole kind of philosophies of design and policing and things, which is designed around ensuring that people don't interact with each other in public places, and we try and minimise the extent to which, you don't want to encourage people to be loitering. So, literally, you will see this, that we need to stop people from hanging out and accidentally talking to their neighbours or anything. So the first thing is, we need to be doing more, I think, when we talk about restitching, when we talk about regeneration, when we talk about levelling up, to think about the often quite small, quite cheap, quite quick things we can be doing to make neighbourhoods and places much, much better for community interaction. And that means street trees are a classic. Planting street trees is one of the simplest and best things you can do for a neighbourhood anywhere. There's just tons of evidence on good things that does for it. Benches, places where people can naturally and spontaneously hang out and meet, makes a huge difference. There's tons of evidence on this, and think about the places that feel a bit scary and rubbish. They generally they have a poor quality public realm. You don't want to hang around in it. The nice places are quite obviously nice, and that, guess what, fosters more positive community engagement, more positive relationships. But that's the micro level. The macro level is obviously is a bit more challenging, and here the big one is roads. And I think we need to start having a conversation in this country about roads. We're not very honest about it. We talk about active transport and things like that, but really the problem isn't, we actually have great infrastructure for cycling. The problem is that it's dominated by really, really inhospitable, inhuman scale roads. Nicholas is here, his latest paper points out that of the 12 most least prosperous communities in this country, 10 of them either have dual carriageways driven right through the middle of their town centres, or ring road dual carriageways that separate their town centres from the rest of the place. Now, what do you think that does to the community's ability to interact with each other and with the place that they live? We designed places specifically to get people out of them as fast as possible, and to make it impossible for people who are doing normal things like walking to actually engage with that place in any kind of meaningful or comfortable way. And again, the evidence is really, really clear on this. Where would you buy a house on the busy A road we've got to walk a half mile down it just to be able to cross, or on the kind of pleasant residential street with a nice bit of public realm, a little pocket park and a few street trees. It's pretty obvious stuff, this, and yet we're spending £23 billion on a road budget, which mostly seems to be about more dualling, more heavy roads. So we need to be talking about actually using some of that money to redesign our towns and cities to be less car dependent and actually reclaim some of that space from parking, and from fast roads. That leads on to the hidden levers. Why is it we do this? A lot of the time it's down to really, as we found, really buried, obscure little rules buried deep in the system, particularly in transport, which is dominated by, let's face it, a certain category of person who tends to be really into data sets and kind of acronyms, and it's very inhuman kind of language. Buried in one of those, the tag, you have an awful, which I think the transport assessment, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a whole set of rules around assessing the viability of different transport interventions. Essentially what it does is it puts a price on the outcomes that you might get from transport interventions. Guess what? They're massively slated in favour of high-speed car travel. That's what it values. So guess what? That's the number you get out at the end. It always says it's worth spending £1 billion on a roundabout, but it's not worth spending a few hundred quid to create a much more pleasant street that people might walk on and the kid might feel happy to cycle their bike along. But because these things are so buried in very boring, obscure, bureaucratic systems, we don't tend to challenge them. So we need to think about these things both as in terms of the human scale places that we live, but also that really techie boring stuff. We've just got to get into it and pull it apart and change it. And that leads on to the third thing, which is that unfortunately this stuff is not just mother's apple pie. It's not just unalloyed goods. Right? There are conflicts there, and I worry. I've been involved in regeneration discussions for many years, that we tend to talk only about the good stuff, and we ignore the fact that often there are conflicts of interest here. There are vested interests. It's not always a win-win. Great it can be, but it isn't always. Sometimes some people and some agendas will lose out. And the road stuff is a classic example. You try adjusting someone's right to park for free and see the reaction you get. There will be vested interest. And the big one here is property ownership. If we're talking about restitching the social fabric, we have to do something about problematic property ownership, which at the moment is blighting our high streets. We reckon about between 1 in 5 and 1 in 7 high street properties are now empty. People are sitting on those properties, and a lot of the time they're making money out of it. We looked at one case in Hastings where beautiful Printworks building had been left derelict for 30 years. In that time, it had 13 different planning permissions and 10 different owners, each one of whom had made money on the deal while leaving it empty. So we need to tackle some of these issues, which does mean recognising vested interests and sometimes being a bit brave about overcoming.
Yeah, I think just to labour that point, I think some of my experience of working in this space is all very well funding community initiatives, but if you're not going to look at some of that, what Kat referred to as deep code or what we might think of as hidden wiring, then you are really just sticking plasters on things. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions for you all to respond to, and then I want to leave at least 10 minutes for others to ask questions. You don't all have to answer both of them, so just pick which one. But I guess I'm interested to hear from all of you at this time and in this long, deep work that we have to do to move into a different future that does work better for everyone. How do you think we can avoid just repatterning the same things over again? What are the new models and new we've got shared assets in the room. That's not obviously your name. But there's these other, that this is such an opportune time to see other ways of doing things, to think of different models and so I'm interested in how do we make sure we don't just repattern what has been at this time? And then the other question is, for all of you in the different work you're doing, what will make the most difference now? What needs to happen now? What do you think needs to be heard the most in this conversation of restitching? Am I going to Kat?
Okay, so maybe I'll give a couple of examples about repatterning. So I think it really is that kind of imagination side of design, and almost like flipping things on its head or taking some of these different logic models around, sharing economy, circular economy, not just thinking about how we can make things more efficient, but actually how things can regenerate and grow. So a couple of examples. We worked with a place 40 miles north of Newcastle called Amble, and it's a fishing village, and it had been in kind of decline for many, many years. And they had kind of big employers coming in and, you know, employing people in the factory, and then that closed and people were unemployed again. And that kind of dependency culture was really kind of ingrained, that paternalistic kind of employer who came in to kind of save the day. And there was going to be a kind of a redevelopment in the waterfront, so kind of a fishing wharf turned into a new block of flats. And rather than just designing that and designing that well and in a really beautiful way, they brought together lots of, we came up and we brought together lots of different types of people, so the local tourist board, local communities, and really got people to go right into the root of what people, not just what people needed, but what people's aspirations were, where people's strengths were, what was the heritage and the underlying stories of the town. And instead of just building within the red lines of that development, actually what people said they wanted is not new houses, but new opportunities to work. So instead, the developer and the local council created all these little pods along the wharfront where people could start setting up their own surf school, a cafe, a craft shop. All of a sudden, it started to become a real foodie destination. The foodie destination led it to win High Street of the Year award in 2015, and that kind of channeled further investment. So kind of a block of flats of 6 turned into 2,000 new homes and £80 million investment. And it was all because of that kind of reframing of not just let's just put some new houses in here, but actually deeply listening to what community aspirations were. So that's one example. And just another one is we do quite a lot of work with Network Rail. And again, we work at the macro level of actually how do you connect up the whole country using the rail network, but also how can communities be involved in designing kind of spaces in their communities, like small railway stations exist in a lot of communities and often quite unforgotten. So again, we spent quite a lot of time before we went into the kind of the design and the technical design of things, just spending time with communities, understanding how we might reframe what a station even is. Is it somewhere you get from A to B and use to leave and go to somewhere else, or actually is it the epicentre, the community hub? Often train lines are like great to put in the middle of towns and split them apart, but this could become the place for people to connect. And so at the moment we're just going out and doing a huge piece of work called Explore Station, where we're getting people to kind of put on VR headsets, and use Lego to actually be reimagining what these places look like, which is much more about a kind of vibrant community hub where people can repair bikes, where people can grow vegetables, all sorts of things, rather than just getting on a train and going to another town.
Thanks, Kat. I'm going to go to you next, Angie.
Okay, just sort of looking at what's needed now, and just put it in perspective of when I think about, you know, how we can transition places where we are. I'm just looking at this from a very place-based perspective here. What I didn't tell you about Boston was it's got 16,500 people. It's quite a large estate, edge of town, built into war as a group-run estate, so architects and planners and all sort of know what that means. Lots of green space, parkland, very large gardens that were meant to be the size of allotments, and many of them are. People really can't manage with them a lot now. Actually, it's very difficult, especially for older people living in the properties. But any development land, we've got barely any left, barely a postage stamp left of actual, you know, designated development land. So there isn't anybody soon that's going to come to our estate and actually want to develop some new houses or any other sort of commercial scheme actually. So I think what's needed for us now is, partly we need to put a bit of the politics aside, because what we find generally is a lot of local politics is petty politics, you know, and you know, where things get developed, where money gets spent is difficult. We have a city mayor, we've got 52 out of 54 elected members in our city, our neighbour. There's barely any challenge really given that and scrutiny because of the, you know, we are very much a red city. And most development investment has been around the city centre and cultural and historic places. So out of town, edge of town neighbourhoods really have not benefited at all through any sort of development for quite a long time. However, so what's needed now for us is, aside from where we are and the potential of the opportunity, a lot what we're doing is almost retro repairing previous probably poor design decisions or design decisions that were appropriate at the time but have not really been developed and made more appropriate for the way we live now. So, you know, for us it's about having interdependent opportunities. So, for example, 2 years ago, 3 months before the pandemic, we took over a large asset from the council, sort of down on this Leeds Youth Centre. We turned it into a community hub, got 5 football pitches, dance studio, all sorts of stuff. We raised all the funds for ourselves. And we've helped to nurture 5 community businesses based in that building. So a cafe, a bar, a football academy, a dance academy, and they're all completely interdependent upon the footfall of people coming in, the community coming to use it, every pound they spend stays local, that sort of thing. And for us, and I think probably for a lot of communities that maybe won't have the opportunity to develop and regenerate much as you might like to think they will, is actually they're going to have to rely on their own resources, their own skills, their own confidence, to, you know, really to be able to explore the ideas. So the sort of thing that Andre was talking about is right up my street, really, because it's really about investing that time and resources to give the confidence to local people that actually they can get on and make that transition into a better place for themselves with what they have, both physically and in the public realm that they live in, sort of thing, but more importantly, through what they can create for themselves and to be interdependent with each other.
Thank you. Toby? Not too long.
I think I'll just do one thing. I'd try and make a plea for when we're talking about changing places, improving places, regenerating places, that rather than always thinking about infrastructure and buildings, we actually kind of reverse the focus and focus more on the bits in between, the streets, the squares, the kind of crack bits of land that get forgotten about, because those are the ones that are actually easiest to change. They're the ones that really shape the nature of a community and how it feels. You know, actually get all that stuff right, and I think a lot of the buildings will look after themselves a bit more easily.
I think it's how it's all brought together as well. That's often, it's like design happens in silos. Andre, you've got the last word.
Maybe the last word. Change starts closer to home. I think that's where I would put it. I think we've spoken a lot about the top-down approach, where we're looking at buildings, we're looking at the urban fabric, but actually a lot of those design changes we're not going to see. Those people aren't going to see in their lifetime. 20 years later, you might see that it was a bad design decision, and then we're redesigning the solution. So we can't really be problem-orientated when it comes to that. And a lot of people don't necessarily have the resources, like you're saying, they're dealing with their own lifestyles. So I think from like the sector and the kind of local authority point of view, there needs to be a kind of a deeper understanding to reduce the friction that communities and citizens experience in trying to build their aspirations, in trying to achieve their dreams and their goals for their local area. There needs to be, and for those same local people, there needs to be more partnerships and people supporting them to develop their ideas to something that can be achievable, sustainable, and long-lasting. And I think it's a matter of kind of taking a more an intervention approach and looking at how we create new interactions between people and place and learning from those insights to incubate and, I guess, through that, incubate communities so that they can build the innovations of tomorrow.
Thank you. So I'm going to open it up for questions. We've got 9 minutes.
Oh, hi, I'm Susan Parham, University of Hertfordshire. Obviously, what Toby says resonates with me as someone who teaches urban design to planners. But I was really interested in something you said, Andre, about, I was really interested in talking about the kind of interplay between the kind of built form, you know, like the actual kind of physical kind of nature of places. I think Kat talked about that too, and I'm totally into that. But I thought you were saying, Andre, about like going beyond that, you know, and about that kind of, and I just wondered if you could sort of say a bit more about how, you know, you talk about co-design and kind of like partnering and not going top-down. I just thought that's a really rich territory. Perhaps we can learn more from you about that.
Yeah, I absolutely love urban design, but something, and I really wanted to go into it actually when I went into architecture. But what happened is people don't necessarily feel a belonging or sense of belonging to that road or to that building when they move into an area. You need to feel like you can say, that's mine. You know, I live in that area with that church, with that big, with that shopping centre, or with those homes. But people don't really get to say that anymore. They're actually just transitioning through spaces now. And that is very much because the world is very much more commoditized, very much more connected. I think in terms of co-design, we need people to be able to contribute to those design decisions much earlier, but in the imagination stage, what could we create? And it is a matter of partnering with design professionals because they do have a certain level of expertise, but we're also built into a way of working that is very standardized. We're going back into an old way of thinking, and we're using that knowledge, that kind of pedagogy.
We know what you mean.
You know what I mean, that pedagogy of knowledge. And we're then saying that we've got a lot of professionals that want to be the professionals, but actually we need to act more as consultants. You know, we need to be acting more as advisors and allowing people to come up with the solutions through their own experiences, observing their experience and actually finding out where their rituals are. That's what I meant earlier. Rituals are the foundation of belonging and identity. And without those rituals, we can't create habits and communities and spaces that feel great. We can't do that, so we need to start at the core, which is why I say it comes back to being at home. And if you can imagine what your home looks like, then you should be able to look outside and say, what does my street look like? And what does my town look like? And how can I be a part of shaping those decisions? I think to get that, we need more conversations. We need more conversations that are a lot more accessible, simpler knowledge, smaller groups, larger groups. But essentially, I find that when we have a lot of conversations about how we do this work, but the people that really need to hear it aren't in the rooms, and they're not really there to ask the questions. And that's something that I really want to that's what I try to facilitate through Kiondo. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the things like that gets underestimated is even just that thing of like, what are the right questions to ask at this time? I think, you know, we go in to do consultations or, you know, very shallow in some ways kind of approaches to really try and surface what are in communities' dreams. And I think the design of a question can change the whole outcome of how something ends up existing in the world. There's another question.
Yeah, it's more, I feel like maybe there is a really obvious answer to this and I just haven't looked, but I feel the presence of the Arts Council is very visible to creative sector communities within communities. The Design Council isn't in the same way, and at the stage we're at now, I find the Arts Council increasingly trying to be the Design Council without the mechanisms of the Design Council in place, and therefore we haven't got a structure that supports and funds the development of small-scale organisations without them having to evidence a massive community engagement output, while they're still trying to find their feet of who they are. And it's a real dark matter block. But if you're enabling designers as opposed to just, and I don't mean just creativity, because of course creativity is a fantastic thing, if you're enabling people to design and understand that there are a body of people that can help them design, I just wonder why Design Council and Arts Council are out of kilter.
Well,
in perception, I think access, as Andre was talking about, kind of just knowing you're there, I guess.
yeah. I mean, I think there is a big funding disparity between the two councils, which allow, you know, does allow the Arts Council to do lots more funding in areas. What I would say though is there are 1.97 million people working in the UK design community. That's nearly 1 in 20 working age people. That's huge. And there is this huge, therefore, tapestry of creative people living in communities with communities who are there to bring out. Yeah, exactly. So, what some of the work that we do is, you know, as I mentioned, there's a program called Design Differently, where we are trying to link up people in communities who are designing in any case, They are changing their parks. They're making amendments to how the urban landscape is, public parks and so on, with professional designers and also with people in local councils who want to be able to kind of meet sustainability outcomes but actually need to work with others. So that's part of our kind of programme work to stitch that together. And we'd love to do more. So
It's not a criticism of
No,
the
no,
design council.
But I think there's something really interesting about how does the Design Council, the National Lottery Community Fund, the Arts Council, the National Lottery Heritage, how do they all weave together more in place?
Yeah.
Because that siloing doesn't really make sense of some of the stuff we have to. There's one last question. We're going to push it in. Sorry, the gentleman there had his hand up.
Thank you. I'm going to try and stretch design to include financial sustainability or resilience, if I may. And there comes a point when the community are volunteering, participating, and then it sort of transforms to being professional. And what I mean by professional is people are being paid to do certain things. And I don't think we're going to repattern things unless we help those community groups pick up the financial skills to actually create their own revenue streams. So it's really interesting what Angie said about 70% of your revenue is earned income, which means you have agency. You no longer rely on those that got you going. And that, to me, is a repatterning. And I struggle to see how we're going to do that. And this is someone who's come from the private sector that's trying to do that. And we crash too often. And it's awful when you see all that energy and joy, and it's just like an ice cream on the floor. And so how do we build a pattern of helping communities help themselves? Because we know it does work. I see that Coin Street here. That's the question. It's a bit verbose, but yeah, how do we do that repattern?
30 seconds.
It's an easy one.
And then I'll put an answer at
Well, I think about the vested interest. I think you need guardians locally that are going to. We act as a guardian, don't we? A steward, for what we do. Really, I suppose that's our biggest function in many respects, because as you say, private business can sort of crash and fail with it. And interestingly, we host lots of small micro businesses in our workspace and that sort of stuff. And after a while, they really get what we do, and they like spending their money with us. So I think there is much more scope actually for community and private business to work much more hand in hand for the interests of the community where they're based. Because I think often, particularly small businesses that might rent space, and that's a lot of it, there are hundreds of thousands of small businesses around the country renting space. Who do they rent that space from? Primarily very large shareholder businesses, don't they? In actual fact, there is such other scope in local areas, and where that money can be circular and it can stay local. And then when I spoke about the interdependency earlier, it's all about that. And to me, that's what can make. So the whole thing about having that financial sort of power is about earning it local and looking after it locally. That's really important.
One line.
I mean, just to speak up on the Coin Street point, the reason it works with Coin Street is because they were able to buy, the community was able to buy prime bit of London real estate for £1. And literally, because the collectors have made that choice.
40 years on, it still works.
Absolutely, but because it was set up on that incredible bonus to start with, right? If we're not prepared to kind of take that degree of kind of leap of faith and risk, then you're not going to get that sort of results so easy.
I'm a pessimist right now. I was just going to say, you're right. It comes down, for most people, it comes down to a question of economic skills and well-being in order for them to be able to fulfill their goals, right? But at the end of the, I think, actually, yeah, don't worry about it. It's all right. It will get dark real soon. But no, I agree with your point. This needs to happen. But going with what Toby said, there's a lot of a lot of towns now where all of that land is privatised. So smaller businesses trying to secure space doesn't happen, and the funders aren't looking to fund small businesses to hold space. So it does get dark in that sense, because if small businesses and social enterprises and people that want to transition our economy and our environments into a new place can't hold space, then the Pareto principle stays in place, 20% and the 80% without. And that's not what we want to do going forward. We need to be able to create more sustainable economies, and that's a much longer conversation.
And I think that's where, you know, that is where being really clear about what kinds of capital is important at what time, and now a lot of philanthropy should probably be thinking about how does it help communities buy up assets, and you know, that, come on lottery funds. I don't think that's in their remit, but you never know. Anyway, thank you so much to my panel, it's not my panel, to the panel, and yeah, it's